Um, Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Mikayla Goodrich. I'm the supervisor of the application development team here in OTIS. As you might imagine, that position involves working with a lot of data from a lot of sources and a lot of destinations. So over the years, we have encountered a good many things. Today, we're going to go over things, and I'm going to try and keep this very high level without getting down into the weeds. This is meant to be just a overview. That said, if you have questions along the way, by all means, put it in the comments and we will make sure everything we can get answered gets answered. Chris is here and will call to my attention anything I do not catch myself. Okay, so before we begin, does everyone have a notion of what it means when we talk about data and data quality? Okay, so data is basically when we are dealing with a vendor or the state or the public. Yes, yes, Sharon, garbage in, garbage out. That is an element of this. The data that we produce is basically the evidence of what we believe we have done or what we claim we have done to the public or other governmental entities. And the quality of that data is talking about both its accuracy, its precision, and its precision, and also its quality. That is to say, is it usable? Is it going to say what we believe it says? And there's a couple ways that this can manifest that we're going to get into later. But when we're talking about this data and what we use it for, in my team, the one thing we use it for is integrations. We are taking data from one system over here, and we are taking it and putting it over here, and along the way, we make it fit the shape of where it's going. That's called ETL, extract, transform, and load. This is how we roster all of our integrations. So think of ClassLink, or if you have ever encountered Able or Maya Learning, we have hundreds at this point of different things where we do different integrations. Some of them are small data sets where we just have a few people that we need to make part of a system over here. Some of them are like ClassLink, where it is literally everyone in the district and everything about where they're at and what they do. Excuse me. And there are all sorts of different formats and requirements. There are several major standards that we use. There are multiple different systems that we get data from, and I'm going to go into those in a minute. The next thing that we use it for the most, and arguably this is the most important part, is the state reporting, and in general, our accountability to the public. Now, I say that this is probably the most important one because one of the state reports that we do is ADM, and that's how we get money from the state. So anything about our budget, that is derived from the data we produce about what we say we're doing and who we say we're doing it for and with. And then, of course, there's all sorts of public accountability. That can be everything from public information requests to compliance with all sorts of reporting requirements for grants or federal title programs or graduation rates or anything like that. There's lots of different things that we use the data for. Questions so far? All right. Now, in terms of where we're getting our data, primarily we're getting it from Synergy. So anytime anything goes on with the students, whether it's student view or parent view, or it's a school secretary in the front end, or the SIS team here in central office, or someone in one of the different funded programs departments, Synergy is where we get most of the data that we work with. And then it goes to different places. We have a data warehouse that a lot of Synergy data loads into regularly. We also use it in all sorts of staged data sets that we isolate out of Synergy. There are reports built into Synergy. Also, PeopleSoft, that's all of our financial data, all of our staff data, everyone's information about like where their paychecks are going, what their pay rate is, how much leave they have, what sites they work at, all of that we get from PeopleSoft. After that, there are lots of little niche sources where we get like a kind of data or this little bit of data. Most commonly, I would say that is things like assessment vendors giving us our student scores back. And then that makes its way to the data warehouse or Synergy. But also there will be things where staff in a department are doing work in a vendor system that is specific to the work that they do. And then there is some data from that system that we've then got to pull back and load into Synergy, typically. And that is, you'll see that most commonly with transportation when we're talking about student bus routes. And also you will see it with nutrition where we are loading the free and reduced meal status of students into Synergy. So there's many places, but those are the two big ones. And then the people we're giving the data out to. We've got all the vendors I mentioned before, and there are many dozens of those. There's also Oregon Department of Education. That's where all the state reports wind up going. Then the Federal Department of Education, there are reports that the different title groups have to do. I mentioned that. Also, our auditors, internal and external, we give data to them all the time. And that's not the only thing they work from, but our data is one of the things that they work with. Also, in terms of public records requests, the most visible one you're probably aware of is every year, one of our local papers requests who works here and how much they're paid. That's all public record, and then they publish that list for everyone to see. And the different local papers don't just do that for us, they do that for every local government agency. Also, our students and our staff use our data for all sorts of things. Where are the trends? Which students need interventions? Students get their transcripts. We provide transcripts to third parties. All sorts of things where the data comes and goes. So the accuracy of this data winds up being really important. And one of the favorite jokes I like to make is I find it personally very deeply ironic that despite all of the personal and often heroic work that we do in our day-to-day, in the end, everything we do gets turned into a stack of numbers that's going to wind up in some report to someone else. And the truth of what we're doing is going to come out in those numbers, hopefully. But there's very often very little record of individual actions along the way. It all aggregates into the data and becomes a bunch of numbers. So the idea that I'm not a number, well, actually we're all numbers, just very heroic numbers. So there's two kinds of major data quality issues that we care about. And I call them concrete and abstract. That is terminology I invented for this purpose. And when I talk about a concrete data quality issue. I'm talking about something where you pull up the singular piece of data, you look at it and you go, yep, that's a problem. And that's what these are. So you have a situation here where I have a address to enter someone's email address in. As much as we can, we try to automate this. We don't want people typing emails by hand. And the reason we don't want that is all of these variations you see here. Unfortunately, I can't show you specific examples from Synergy, but I can tell you from personal experience that there are thousands of emails that have little typos like this all throughout. Mostly it has to do with parent emails, but not exclusively. And you'll see these kinds of errors where they're all very reasonable and understandable typos to make. But if you do that with an email address, it's either not going to go where you intended it, that last one where it's N3T instead of .net, that's what's going to happen there. But the other ones, like the comma on PPSnet, that's not going to go anywhere. That's just going to immediately bounce as not an email. And the top one isn't an email at all. Also, you may have encountered in Synergy a name field that's got something like this. So it's got those parentheses and the preferred version of the name. Now, in most cases nowadays, we have a preferred name field for everyone. And if we can help it when we're doing anything with data, the preferred name is what we're going to use. That said, there are plenty of name fields all throughout Synergy where you will see something like this, where someone wasn't sure what to do and was in a hurry, so they just put the preferred name next to the first name in some form like this. So then what happens is we go to display that preferred name to some third-party system, and we wind up with a veritable festival of errors and or problems because that isn't just a first name. I think it was a year ago, I did a similar presentation, maybe two even, about equity and names. And this sort of thing, having someone displayed by their preferred name, right? We want to do that, but then the way in which we store that information winds up being a difficulty or potential complication we have to navigate. So the other category, the abstract ones, that's when you're going to look at a piece of data and go, yep, that is a valid value for this field, whatever the field is. But when you look at that value relative to some other value, suddenly you realize this isn't right. Something is wrong. And the trick with these is that you don't necessarily know by looking which one's wrong. There are many, many, many of these. I just grabbed a few that I thought would be pretty clear examples of it. But basically, something like this, where a graduation date doesn't match the dates that the student was actually enrolled, or absences that reference a condition, in this case, a discipline incident, where there's no record of the discipline incident. And then also when students bring us transfer credits, it is very reasonable that they're not going to have records or paperwork or certainty around what grade level it was or where they were or when they took it necessarily, because some of these students are coming from other countries. In addition to language barriers, you have the incredibly wild variation in educational systems. Even domestically, from state to state, you'll find variations. And then that just gets dramatically more complex and difficult when you add in other countries where someone might have gone to school. But the important thing is that you don't recognize or discover these problems until you try to do something with the data and run into the point of comparison where you're looking at how these two things relate to each other. Now, what we do with data when we run into data quality issues. When I'm dealing with vendors, vendors can be very, very ruthless. I'll use that word. An example, we have an integration where we provide data to Multnomah County Library. This is so that they can give all of our students library cards. It's one of the happiest integrations I've ever been able to set up. And if the data is wrong, they throw that value out. But we have other vendors where if the same thing were to happen, securely, parent is an example of this, where if a parent email address is wrong, if there is a single wrong email in the entire file we give securely, they say, sorry, but this file is no good, and they ingest none of the data. So then what we wind up having to do is be very defensive. If the data is wrong at all, we have to exclude that data. So we wind up in a bunch of situations where we are taking data that someone theoretically might want and would use if they could, but they can't because we don't have their right email address to even notify them of the thing necessarily. Now, there's nothing that we do or can do in that place. We try to get the data remediated after the fact. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. But it winds up causing us problems. And in those cases, we just have to throw all the bad data out. In other cases, we'll use placeholder values where, well, if you don't know or this is no good, put this value here. In a perfect world, the vendors will be able to accept our data and say, oh, by the way, these values were bad, and if you could fix those, that would be great. And we get a report back from the vendor telling us that. That happens with ClassLink, for example. The absolute worst thing is we can be put in a position where we have to literally invent a value to put in the field because it's the only way that the data that must go to the place can go to the place. And that is the transfer credits I mentioned. Right now, we're navigating a situation where that may be the only solution that's available. So problems like that. I've said a whole lot of things really fast. Any questions, comments, things people want to know more about?
Hey, Mikayla. So mentioning that another thing that we can and are planning to do more of is that as we identify issues like, invalid email addresses, like the simple thing is that no email address or, every email address must have an @ sign in it. Like, got a rule that ideally we can make it so that the system doesn't allow you to enter data that is wrong in the first place. So we can, that if we can enforce that with rules at that point of entry, we can avoid Sharon's comment of garbage in, garbage out, and that just makes everything better.
Yep. But and that's next.
Oh, hey, look at that.
So, well, not next. Next after next. Sorry. The more abstract data quality issues, for those, RAA maintains an expansive set of checks. And then each school is notified of where the data quality issues that need to be cleaned up are. It tells them what it is. It gives them a pointer to where the data is at. It tells them how to fix it. In AppDev, we log as much as we can bad data with the hopes of being able to fix it. Sometimes we do that when we're developing an integration. Sometimes we set up the ability to go find it if we find out there's a problem and fix it after the fact. But with the data, we try to identify it and we try to fix it. The more accurate the data, the more precise, the more accurate the stories we tell when we tell people what's going on in our schools. And yes, that is a lot of extra work. So in the future, as Chris was alluding, Synergy's got the ability for us to define rules. So we can take a field and we can set up one or more rules about what goes there. So the things that we've discussed in the past, there's a minimum expected age for an enrollment, for example. And when entering date of birth, one of the common things that'll happen is someone will put data in and then they will be in a hurry, tab past the year, and it'll look like we have a kindergartner born this year that's less than a year old. And that's obviously not the case. So doing a check for a date to say that the date is old enough to be plausible in the field. Also, emails is another one. That is a very solved problem. There's a technology called regex, which is short for regular expressions. It's just a way to logically define something that'll give you a true or false across a very large volume of text very quickly. And it'll show you all the places where a condition is true. If you're curious, you can look up what the regex is that defines a valid email. And then you can just use that. There's all sorts of tools you can play with it. And you'll see there's lots of different ways to define an email. And if you look online, you'll see that someone will be like, well, you can check for emails this way over here. And if you want to be just like casual, you can use this expression, or like the actual one is this very, very complex collection of characters that's a regular expression that even some people I know who are accomplished software developers will struggle to read. It can be very, very down in the weeds. But Synergy gives us the ability to use that technology to define rules by field. And we can put them all over the place. Synergy also will let us do something like set up a dashboard, and then it's specific to your school where you work, and you come to your dashboard page and it says you have this many email addresses that need to be fixed. You click and it'll give you the list. We're not doing that yet. That's a thing we'd like to do in the future. And in a similar way, for those more abstract ones, we are hoping to be able to give everyone their own dashboard in the future, again, specific to where you're at and what you're doing, where you just come in, log in, click, and then here's all of the more abstract data issues we found in your area. Here's where they're at. Please go and take a look at them. Questions? Thoughts? All right. That is what I've got, everyone. So if you have things you want to see or things you want to know more about, feel free to send questions to us. Please use the service desk to put them in. they'll wind up with the correct person and we'll get you answers. Or if you run into areas where data is causing you a problem, we'll go ahead and get that taken care of for you.
Mikayla, it's also been a good reminder to, slow down, pay a little bit more attention when you're putting stuff in fields. So,
yes.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Much as I try to type in such a way as to not need a spell checker, I leave that feature enabled everywhere. But even if you use a spell checker, my favorite typo is to leave a suffix off of a word. So I'll type the word, but not its suffix, and then type through the whole sentence, go back and proofread what I read. And there is a very, very valid word in place that is not the word I meant, just the root of it. All right. In that case, everyone, thank you so much for coming. Have a wonderful day.
There's a comment about
Oh. Yes. Yes, and that is an excellent example of a place. So everyone, what Janet put in the comments is that there is online registration portal, and that is parents, that is the general public, entering data into one of our systems of record. And that is an example of a place where these rules are going to be very helpful to us.